Thank you for being here. Today I want to talk about what inclusion actually means in higher education, beyond accommodations, beyond compliance, and beyond the minimum requirements we're often accustomed to. This presentation looks at what the research tells us about how students with disabilities experience college, what supports help them thrive, and why relational and structural inclusion need to work together. My goal is to bring these insights forward in a way that helps us think about practical changes we can make in both classrooms and across institutions. I'll start by setting the stage why inclusion is an urgent conversation in higher education. From there, we'll look at some of the major gaps, what isn't working, and why students continue to encounter barriers. Then I'll pull together key themes from the research to help paint a clear picture of what effective inclusion looks like. We'll move from that evidence into specific ways we can reimagine our classrooms and then expand to campus-wide approaches. Along the way, you'll have opportunities to reflect and connect this to your own experiences. And finally, we'll end with the main takeaways that tie together the research and the recommendations that I found within this project. Inclusion is essential for student success, but students with disabilities still encounter a wide range of barriers, academically, socially, physically, and culturally. Vaccaro and Kimball remind us that belonging and purpose development don't happen by accident. They grow when students feel supported by faculty and connected to the classroom environment. At the same time, Kutcher and Tuckwiller pointed out the students are still navigating inconsistent accessibility and uneven institutional support. Dolmich pushes this further, arguing that many of the structures of higher education are built on ableist assumptions. So when we talk about inclusion, we're not just talking about adding a few accommodations, we're talking about rethinking the way we design learning and the way our institutions operate. Inclusion matters because it changes how students experience college on every level, academically, emotionally, and socially. When students feel like they belong, their confidence grows, they engage more fully, and they're more likely to persist through challenges. For students with disabilities, inclusive environments can make the difference between surviving college and actually thriving in it. Inclusive course design also reduces the pressure on students to constantly ask for accommodations, because the learning environment already anticipates diverse needs. In short, inclusion matters because it creates learning spaces where students don't have to fight simply to access an education. They can focus on learning. Even with growing awareness, there are clear gaps. Accessibility varies dramatically from course to course, and students often depend on the luck of having a supportive instructor. Lombardi and colleagues found that many faculty genuinely care about inclusion, but don't feel prepared or trained to put it into practice. Students who are both working class and disabled face additional obstacles, financially strained, limited resources, and fewer informal networks of support. And the biggest issue is fragmentation. Disability services, faculty, and student affairs all play important roles, but they often operate separately. As a result, students end up being the ones who have to coordinate their own support. These gaps show why isolated efforts aren't enough. Much of the research points to one consistent theme. Students thrive when they feel seen. Relational support, meaning authentic, sustained, and responsive relationships, can make the difference between a student merely surviving college and truly belonging there. Studies show that disability is often experienced less as a personal limitation and more as a response to the environment around the student. When faculty take time to communicate clearly, check in, or offer flexibility without judgment, students report higher confidence, reduced anxiety, and better academic engagement. What stands out in the literature is the idea that support isn't only about resources. It's about trust. It's about knowing that you can approach a professor, advisor, or staff member without fear of being dismissed or questioned. When campuses prioritize connection, students with disabilities feel empowered to advocate for themselves, ask for accommodations early, and participate more fully in their learning experiences. Inclusion becomes more complex when we acknowledge that disability does not exist in isolation. Students bring multiple identities with them: race, gender, class, language background, first-generation status, and these identities shape how disability is perceived and responded to. The research shows that students who sit at the intersection of disability and minoritized identities often face additional layers of stigma, misrecognition, or exclusion. Understanding intersectionality pushes us beyond a one-size-fits-all model of inclusion. It means looking carefully at who has access, whose needs are overlooked, and whose voices are missing from decision-making spaces. Equity requires that institutions pay attention to these disparities and design supports that account for the whole student, not just one part of their identity. When we look at what predicts student persistence, we often focus on motivation or academic preparation. But the research paints a different story. Institutional structures, the systems and policies that students must navigate, play a significant role in whether they stay or leave. Complicated accommodation processes, inconsistent faculty compliance, or inaccessible course materials can turn everyday tasks into overwhelming obstacles. Students frequently report that the greatest barriers are not their disabilities. They are rigid systems built without their needs in mind. When institutions streamline accommodation procedures, ensure faculty accountability, and provide proactive rather than reactive supports, students demonstrate stronger persistence and higher levels of academic satisfaction. In other words, institutional design directly shapes student success. One of the strongest threads in the literature is the effectiveness of universal design for learning and inclusive pedagogical practices. UDL is not about lowering expectations, it's about offering multiple ways to access, engage with, and demonstrate learning. The more flexibility built into a course, the less students have to fight for accommodations and the more they can focus on actually learning. Inclusive pedagogy, it reminds us that the classroom is a shared space. When its structures intentionally diversify materials, incorporate multi-model teaching, or provide clear assignment structures, they create conditions where a wider range of students can succeed. Research consistently shows that these strategies benefit not only students with disabilities, but the entire class. Finally, the broader campus climate shapes how student experiences inclusion. Climate is not just about the policies on the books. It's the tone, the attitudes, the everyday interactions that either welcome students or make them feel like outsiders. A positive climate is one where disabilities is understood as a natural part of human diversity, not an exception to be managed. When campuses cultivate a culture of openness through training, visible disability representation, or intentional messaging, students report greater belonging and fewer experiences of stigma. Conversely, when disability is hidden, minimized, or treated purely as a legal obligation, students feel isolated and less willing to seek support. Climate may be the most intangible factor, but it has some of the most tangible impacts on student success. To create more inclusive classrooms, we need to shift from making accommodations reactively to designing proactively. Embedding UDL principles into courses helps ensure content is accessible from the start, offer multiple ways to engage with material, participate in class, and show understanding. Flexibility is key. Options in assessment formats or timelines can remove unnecessary barriers while still maintaining an academic rigor. Just as important is the relational side. Regular communication, intentional feedback, and supportive mentoring help students feel grounded in the learning community. And when it comes to discussion-based classrooms, inclusive facilitation strategies can make participation feel safer for students who often feel marginalized. When we combine flexible design and relational intentionality, we build learning environments where more students can succeed. Although classroom-level inclusion is essential, campus-wide support is just as important. Collaboration across departments, faculty, student affairs, disability services help ensure students experience consistent support. Faculty training is another key component. Many instructors want to be inclusive but need guidance on how to translate those values into daily practice. Campuses that invest in building social support networks, especially peer mentoring and opportunities for connection, see stronger retention and student well-being. And institutions must address broader systematic issues, especially for students with intersecting identities. Barriers connected to class, culture, and financial stress can't be separated from disability-related challenges. Inclusion becomes sustainable only when it's woven into the institution as a whole. Before we close, I want to invite you to reflect for a moment. Think about your own institution or your own role. Where do you see gaps in inclusion? Which strategies feel realistic and relevant to your context? What would it look like to move from reactive accommodations to proactive design? And finally, how can faculty play a more active role in creating a sense of belonging? These questions help us translate research into action that fits our own environments. To wrap up, there are a few key points I want to highlight. First, inclusion requires both structural change and relational care. Policy matters, but so do everyday interactions. Second, faculty support is one of the strongest predictors of belonging and purpose. Students thrive when they feel connected. Third, universal design for learning reduces barriers and creates more engaging environments for everyone. And finally, campus-wide collaboration is essential. Inclusion doesn't belong to one office, it has to be a shared responsibility. When these pieces come together, higher education becomes not only more accessible, but more meaningful for all students.